Have you heard the news? Didn't expect that. The doomsday clock just advanced 30 seconds. I don't blame you if you have no idea what that means. I had never heard of the clock before recent weeks, but I've heard it mentioned several times recently. It's actually been around since 1947, when the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists came up with the idea of a clock as a symbol for the overall state of the planet. The doomsday clock isn't a scientific instrument. There's actually no physical clock at all. This group of scientists simply assesses the risks facing the planet at any given point in time. The greater the risks, the closer the time creeps toward midnight. During times of acute danger, the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, the time has gotten very late. And during certain calmer periods, like the early 1990s, it's clicked back a bit in time. In 1990, it was 11:47 p.m., to give you a ballpark there. There's a little buffer, 13 minutes till midnight. Due to environmental and other crises, it's been ticking ahead over recent years. And this past week, the minute hand crept forward another 30 seconds. The statement from the scientists behind the clock said this about the adjustment, that it was an attention-calling signal that was meant to acknowledge what a dangerous moment we're in and how important it is for people to take note. So the time, it's now 2.5 minutes to midnight, according to the doomsday clock. And that just sort of summarizes the last week, doesn't it? It kind of feels like whatever it is you most care about, support and welcome for refugees and immigrants, women's rights, action on climate change and protection of the environment, nuclear disarmament, even prohibition on torture. It seems like all of it has been under attack. None of these things is a neutral policy issue. Each of them has a profound moral dimension. Each has to do with caring for the neighbor, for the lost and the least, and with caring for the creation. For people of faith, this has been a seriously disturbing week. I sort of feel like everybody I talk to is walking around a little bit traumatized by all of it. We're all getting sore thumbs from refreshing the horrible news on our phones so many times a day, or we're walking circles in our living rooms or mowing through whole packs of cookies because we don't know what else to do. And the doomsday clock just clicked forward. That's just perfect, isn't it? So we leave that week behind today, and we come to worship to find we are met by the Beatitudes. And I have to tell you, I'm glad for that this morning. Just as things were getting started for Jesus and the disciples, as the crowds were starting to gather and press in, Jesus called his friends together and took them up to a mountain, into the quiet, where they could listen and think and regroup. And that sounds about all right now, doesn't it? Those of us who traveled to Israel-Palestine visited the Mount of Beatitudes a couple of months ago. It's a hill, not a mountain really, in a quiet spot overlooking the Sea of Galilee. At the top of the gentle grassy slopes are gardens with brightly colored flowers that scent the air while you look out over the water. Nobody knows if this is the exact spot where Jesus sat his disciples down and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." But it might have been. Why not? So come up there for a moment and breathe. We will head back down soon enough. Each of the gospel writers begins their story of Jesus' public ministry in a different way, highlighting, emphasizing a different teaching or action. Mark begins with a dramatic exorcism. Luke starts with a punchy sermon delivered in Nazareth. John begins with a miracle at a wedding, and Matthew begins right here, with Jesus taking his disciples aside and teaching them. It's a time of teaching that sets the tone and the course for all of Jesus' ministry and for all of the disciples following that's to come. It's important foundational stuff. We are supposed to pay attention. So what exactly is Jesus teaching here? Well, it has to do with blessing or blessedness. And that sounds simple and lovely enough at first. To be blessed is to be fortunate, to be happy, to be well off. And who doesn't like the sound of that? But the sort of blessing Jesus speaks about is pretty strange. Blessed are the poor in spirit, or those who are at the end of their rope, in Eugene Peterson's translation. Blessed are the meek, or the humble, we might say. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Blessing sounds all right until you actually listen to the list of folks Jesus calls blessed. There's nothing simple and lovely about that. Right here at the beginning, Jesus is telling his disciples that following him is going to mean seeing the world in a very strange and different way. You know how the world typically sees blessing. You know how the common Beatitudes go. Blessed are the hard workers, for they will get results. Blessed are the wealthy, for they will be comfortable. Blessed are the powerful, for they will answer to no one. Blessed are the loudmouthed, for they will be heard. Blessed are the privileged, for their road will be smooth. Blessed are the winners, for the road belongs to them. We know that's how things are supposed to work. That's what everything around us tells us blessedness looks like. These are the kinds of Beatitudes we have seen on powerful display this last week. But Jesus paints a different picture, where the most vulnerable are blessed, the forgotten, the left behind, the undervalued. Following Jesus means seeing the world differently, seeing these people as the ones whom God accompanies, comforts, journeys beside, seeing God's presence where the world is used to seeing only God's absence. And more than that, we know something of what it means to be blessed when we act on behalf of those whom Jesus calls blessed. Peacemakers, mercy seekers, compassion bearers, pursuers of a world made right. These people experience blessing. Up there on the hilltop, with the warm breezes blowing and the water shimmering below, Jesus invited his disciples into a new and strange way of seeing the world. And he invited them to start acting that world into being. I have seen glimpses of this around here lately. 2 weeks ago, a longtime member of the German congregation died. Bernd Däning was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer sometime this past summer. He endured every treatment possible. He fought as hard as he could, and he died far too young, at age 59. His funeral was a week ago Friday, and it was a full house in here with the floor and the balcony full of people, including many from our congregation, people who either knew Bernd or who know his wife, Irmtraut. And there was a moment when I looked around the room, and I saw many of you, and I was struck by the strange blessedness of it. There we were, listening to a sermon in German that I think many of us probably couldn't much understand, but we were showing up, nonetheless, with our bodies and our hearts and our prayers. I saw the family there surrounded by this huge, motley crowd, offering them compassion. And while I know that doesn't fix grief or bring back a loved one who died too soon, God's presence was there, and we were blessed to be there. The very next day was something else entirely. Some of you were there a week ago Saturday when our congregation joined in the Geneva Women's March for Dignity. If you weren't there at the march, you may have seen pictures from it or pictures of some of the hundreds of parallel marches taking place all over the world. While the events were held in conjunction with the march taking place in Washington, D.C., they were about much more than a single election or a single country. 30 or 40 of us were there. I was struck by how many said this was the first time they had marched for anything, but all of us who were there felt that we really needed to be. We were marching for a variety of things: for women's rights, for the rights of LGBT persons, for the dignity of all people, regardless of gender or race or class, as a statement that our communities are beautiful precisely in their diversity. We all had our reasons, and it was held together by a concern for generosity and justice and joy. We were there as individuals, but we were also there as the church. And marching beside many of you felt absolutely right. We were there as people hungering and thirsting for a world made right. And in that moment, shoulder to shoulder with other people who know that same hunger, we were blessed. In the middle of the struggle, we were made whole in some way. When Jesus took his disciples up the mountain, he knew there was much waiting for them back down in the valley. There was a world drunk on power and wealth and mired in conflict and division. There was a long road ahead and a great struggle to come. And up on the mountain, he told them about their role as his followers: to pay attention to those left out, to look with God's upside-down vision, and to find the strange blessedness that comes from seeking this world made right. The disciples would go back down into the valley, and so will we soon enough. And like the disciples, we go there remembering that every movement the world makes toward division and hatred and fear, for all those movements, our role is to embody something different, a beatitude world, to seek mercy and peace and reconciliation. We do it in ways small and large, rising up and speaking out and paying attention and bearing witness. We do it because it is the path Jesus has laid out for us to follow. We do it because it is what we are called to do. And we do it because in that way ahead, and even in that struggle, there is blessedness to be found. Amen.